Imagine this. You're sitting on a treasure chest. It's made of solid gold, and inside, diamonds, rubies, enough cash to buy a small planet. But here's the catch. You're starving to death. Now, this isn't some plot from a dystopian movie. This is the economic reality of the so-called giant of Africa.
Okay, let's dive right in. In this explainer, we're going to peel back the layers of corruption, bad policy, and just plain historical accidents to really understand what's going on with the Nigerian economy. I mean, how does the country with some of the largest natural gas reserves on the continent and just vast oil wealth end up with an economy that feels more like a rigged casino?
So here's our roadmap. We're going to follow this downward spiral, starting with what we're calling the original curse, the one event that really set the stage for everything else. Then, we'll dive into the currency's absolute nightmare collapse, expose the great national heist that bled the treasury dry, and then see how people actually survive day to day in a broken state. And we'll wrap it all up with the giant's paradox, this incredible, almost unbelievable innovation that's happening right alongside total decay.
So the big question is, where did it all go wrong? Well, Nigeria's modern economic problems, they can pretty much be traced back to a single moment, the discovery of crude oil, or black gold. This moment changed the nation's destiny forever, but probably not in the way you'd think.
Just look at this timeline. It shows a truly dramatic shift. Before oil was found in '56, Nigeria was an agricultural powerhouse. I mean, back in the '60s, farming made up over 60% of the entire economy. But then the '70s hit, the oil boom began, and suddenly money was flowing so freely that the head of state literally said their only problem was figuring out how to spend it all.
And here are the consequences of that shift, side by side. The country went from having literal pyramids of groundnuts in the north to oil rigs in the south. The famous cocoa house, a skyscraper, was built with, you guessed it, cocoa money. Today, the entire national budget hangs on the whims of global oil prices. And get this, Nigeria went from being the world's largest palm oil producer to importing it from Malaysia, the very country that first came to Nigeria to learn how to grow it. The nation went from being producers to consumers.
You know, this is a classic case of what economists call the resource curse, and the source material explains it perfectly. Imagine you're a baker, right? But one day you find a magic ATM in your backyard that just spits out free money. Would you still wake up at 4 a.m. to bake bread? Of course not. That's what happened here. The government saw that oil money, and they just stopped baking. They let the entire productive economy just rust away. So if the oil curse killed production, what it did to the currency is frankly even more horrifying. Let's move on to the Naira story, because you have to understand, once upon a time, the Nigerian Naira wasn't just a currency, it was royalty.
Yes, you are seeing that correctly. Around 1980, one single Nigerian Naira could buy you $1.80. It sounds like a fairy tale today, doesn't it? Back then, Nigerians weren't just immigrating to survive, they were flying to London for weekend shopping sprees on Oxford Street. The Naira commanded respect. And here's the reality check. Today, you need around 1,600 Naira to buy that same single US dollar. That is a collapse of over 100,000%. So how on earth did this happen? Well, it was a toxic mix of terrible economics and pure, unadulterated corruption.
One of the biggest reasons for this collapse was a scam called round-tripping. Here's how it worked. The government kept this fake, artificially low official exchange rate. So if you were a powerful, connected person, you could get dollars from the central bank at this super cheap rate, claiming you needed them to, say, import factory equipment. But you wouldn't do that. You just walk across the street, sell those same dollars at the real, much higher black market rate, and instantly make billions of Naira without creating a single job or a single product. And this was happening on an industrial scale.
That whole arbitrage scheme was just one piece of a much larger system of theft. So now we have to talk about the institutionalized scams that effectively bankrupted the country, starting with what might be the single most controversial policy in Nigerian history.
Just look at this chart. By 2022, the government was spending 96% of all its revenue just to keep the price of gasoline artificially cheap. Think about that. For every 100 Naira the government earned, 96 of it went right back out the door for petrol subsidies. This forced the country to go out and borrow money from places like China and the World Bank just to pay for car fuel. It was absolute fiscal suicide.
And where did the rest of the money go? Well, this is where reality gets much stranger than fiction. Back in 2018, an official couldn't account for 36 million Naira. Her explanation? a mysterious snake slithered into the office safe and swallowed the cash. No, I am not making this up.
And it didn't even stop there. Around that same time, a senator claimed that 70 million Naira in cash just vanished because, wait for it, monkeys raided a farmhouse and ran off with it. The sheer absurdity of these stories just shows you how blatant and shameless the theft had become. All of this, the subsidies, the theft, it all led to this terrifying number. By 2022, Nigeria's debt service to revenue ratio hit 116.8%. Let me break that down for you in simple terms. For every 100 Naira the government earned, it owed 116 Naira in loan payments. The country was borrowing new money just to pay the interest on the money it had already borrowed. It was basically a national Ponzi scheme.
So, with a collapsed currency and a bankrupt government, what is daily life actually like for 200 million people? Let's move on and take a look at how citizens and businesses are forced to survive in a state that provides them with almost nothing.
Let's start with electricity, or, the almost complete lack of it. Nigeria, a country with over 200 million people, generates an average of about 4,000 megawatts of power. Now, for comparison, South Africa, with less than a third of Nigeria's population, generates 58,000. It is mathematically impossible to power a 21st century economy on the same amount of electricity as a mid-sized American city.
And what about moving goods around? This quote is just mind-boggling. Because of the legendary gridlock and the rampant extortion at the Lagos ports, that 20-kilometer truck journey from the port to a local warehouse often costs more than the 12,000-kilometer sea journey all the way from China. This is literally how inefficiency and corruption choke an entire economy to death.
But here is where the story gets really complex. Because amidst all this failure, all this decay, something absolutely incredible is also happening. And this brings us to our final section, the great paradox of Nigeria. This massive tension between a mass exodus of talent and a miraculous burst of innovation. So let's start with the exodus. There's this phenomenon known as Japa, which is a Yoruba word that basically means to flee, and it is stripping the country of its best and brightest minds. It's estimated that 50 medical specialists leave Nigeria every single week. The Nigerian taxpayer pays to subsidize their training, and then developed nations get a fully formed, brilliant doctor for free.
But then, right alongside that tragedy, you have this. In 2020, the American tech giant Stripe bought Paystack, a Nigerian fintech startup, for $200 million, and it was built by two young Nigerians in a country with no stable electricity. This proves the talent is there in abundance. The problem isn't the Nigerian people, it has always been the Nigerian system.
So how does the country even function? What's holding it all together? Well, the answer is the shadow economy. The IMF estimates that a staggering 65% of Nigeria's GDP comes from the informal sector. This is your market woman, the vendor on Instagram, the freelance plumber. These are the millions and millions of hustlers who have essentially fired the government and figured out how to survive and even thrive on their own terms. And this brings us to our final lingering question. The old system, the one built on oil and debt, it has clearly and spectacularly failed. But the rise of tech and the sheer stubborn resilience of its people, that suggests a new way forward. The collapse of the old might just be the painful birth of the new. So what do you think? Is Nigeria on the brink of collapse, or is this just the darkness before the dawn?